previous modules, you've learned a lot about opioid use disorders, OUD, and effective treatment approaches. Throughout, we've introduced you to how your role as either a probation officer, PO, or community provider, CP, can help support the individuals under community supervision to address OUD. In this module, we'll dig more into how each of your roles intertwine to help provide support. A good starting place is to think about how individuals in need of treatment transition through the criminal legal system and treatment. The behavioral health services cascade is a helpful way to see how individuals under community supervision ideally move through assessment, referral, and engagement in the treatment process. As represented by the bars in the figure, there are generally a smaller number of individuals whose needs are identified and who gain access to needed services at each step through the process. This reduction in the number of people served reflects missed opportunities for need identification, transition problems between the legal system and treatment services, and retention problems within treatment. Both POs and CPs are essential to avoiding these missed opportunities and overcoming these transition and retention problems. As a PO, it may be easy to assume your role only exists within the legal system realm, while as a CP, it may be easy to assume your role only exists in the transition and treatment realm. However, in an ideal working relationship, both roles have distinct and overlapping parts within this process towards treatment. First, let's review the primary roles of the PO and CP. The primary role for the PO is commonly going to be seen as protecting public safety and supporting the individual on supervision to address their identified needs. In terms of MOUD, this translates into the PO working with the individual to prioritize identified needs to address, this may be called case planning, referring the individual to a CP, and supporting the individual while they're engaged in treatment. The primary role for the CP is commonly going to be seen as providing clinical assessment to diagnose and match an individual's needs to the appropriate treatment, providing treatment to individuals, and supporting individuals in their treatment process. In terms of MOUD, this could mean directly prescribing medication and monitoring medication engagement, or this could mean supporting the individual in treatment approaches that complement their MOUD engagement. It's also possible that the CP may be in-house to the criminal legal system, or external and based in the community. While these descriptions are not all inclusive to the various roles you fill as either a PO or CP, these are high-level descriptions of the roles you fill. Now, let's explore further how these roles translate into actions on the behavioral health services cascade. As we've discussed, there is a great deal of overlap and interaction in the roles of POs and CPs working with individuals who may engage in MOUD. When roles intertwine so significantly, it's important to both understand one another's roles and communicate well. Let's consider how these roles interact. In many circumstances, the Community Supervision Office will have trained individuals completing some type of evidence-based screening or assessment tool to identify an individual's needs to make an appropriate referral. Screening tools indicate the potential that a need or problem exists, typically resulting in a yes or no response, while assessment tools indicate specific information such as problem severity, diagnosis, and treatment approach recommendations. The assessments used by the criminal legal system vary to the extent of specific information provided and typically fall between a screening and a full clinical assessment. These assessment results help the PO or other supervision staff to make appropriate treatment referrals based on an individual's needs. However, the CP commonly needs to conduct an additional diagnostic assessment before initiating treatment with the individual. Once an individual's needs and best treatment options are assessed and discussed with the individual, then both the PO and CP can support treatment initiation by working with the individual to work through any barriers such as transportation or balancing various obligations. Perhaps the CP will recognize other needs they can't address, so they could work with the individual and PO to identify other referral and treatment resources. In some systems, those in the criminal legal system can gain quicker access to treatment through designated slots. Communication between the PO and CP can help make sure all opportunities are explored to support the individual receiving needed services. Next, once an individual engages in treatment, both the PO and CP can support the individual sustaining engagement in treatment and continuing care. Both the PO and CP may have access to supportive services that will help the individual maintain success. Many of the individuals with opioid use disorders, OUD, on supervision have multiple dynamic needs that make it very important for ongoing assessment. These assessments may be done by community supervision, the CP, or both. Part of the value of communication between PO and CP is to make sure each other is aware of these service needs, which can affect both public safety and recovery. Through this process, you can see how important the roles of both the PO and CP are to ensure people are assessed and treated, as well as how they must be in continuous harmony if an individual's movement through the process is to be successful. As the behavioral health services cascade demonstrates, there are many opportunities for individuals to miss out on treatment or prematurely stop treatment, and the communication and handoffs between organizations are essential to not allowing people to fall into these gaps. Individuals on community supervision face many barriers and challenges, and it's essential that a lack of communication and working together between their PO and CPs is not one of them. It's time to take a moment again to reflect on the material we've shared and how it applies in your day-to-day activities. First, take out a piece of paper, or for those of you who prefer a little more digital brainstorming, open up a Word or text document. Next, think about times when you've worked with an individual with OUD. Describe when a missed opportunity has arisen in your working relationship between a PO and CP. Lastly, brainstorm some other areas where you believe individuals with OUD on supervision may be missing opportunities to get their appropriate treatment. Now hang on to this list you've created. We'll be working with this some more as we continue this module. Now that you've learned more about the potential missed opportunities to get individuals assessed and treated, let's talk about what an ideal working relationship between the PO and CP may look like. There can be either formal or informal communication. Let's start with formalizing the communication between community supervision and treatment. Formalizing the relationship and communication between community supervision and treatment is very important. We understand that as frontline staff, you may not feel that you have control over this, but you may have more influence than you give yourself credit for. Think about these recommendations for formal approaches as ones that you could take to your agency, and your partner agency on the other side, to solidify your communication into standard practice so that the communication doesn't disappear when that one person retires. You know who we're talking about. Here are a few key considerations about formalizing this relationship. Coordinate what a warm handoff looks like between your agencies. We all know that a common missed opportunity is when individuals are handed a referral phone number and address by the PO and sent on their way. How often do they make it to the CP's front door? How often do they face potential violation due to not following through on the referral? This is known as a passive referral. These types of handoffs are often ineffective. A warm handoff is an active referral where an immediate connection is made between the individual and the provider. As an organization, there are some solutions that help close this gap. For example, the CP could have an office in the community supervision office so that someone can walk down the hallway to meet immediately with the individual after a referral. Another example is that the PO could help the individual coordinate their appointment to meet with the CP, such as making sure the individual is able to get an open time slot for intakes, or helps call to set up a specific time. Referral and intake processes vary significantly between locations and organizations, so it's important to identify specifically what may help make this warm handoff most successful for each relationship. To formalize this communication, you should also consider creating an agreed-upon list of information from each organization that can be shared between the PO and CP. To do this, start by creating a list of the kinds of information that should be shared. This will include both positive, for example, always show up on time, and negative information, for example, having trouble showing up as scheduled. It can be helpful to create this list together so that you can discuss why certain information would be helpful to supporting the individuals with OUD under supervision. We'd suggest that you start by thinking of this as a wish list without limitations. List anything that would help you support the individual. Once the list is complete, then start to discuss potential challenges to sharing the information, such as HIPAA restrictions, state or local confidentiality restrictions, or lack of treatment availability. Consider if the need for information necessitates working through solutions to these challenges. For instance, it might be important to get HIPAA waivers from individuals to help facilitate important information sharing. For additional assistance on sharing potentially sensitive information, review the resources provided for this module. Once you've worked out the information to share, you should consider how this information will be shared. There are many ways this can be formalized, but you should consider ways that make information sharing consistent with your entire organization, not just specific to each person. An example would be POs sharing with CPs if the individual is having a particularly hard time juggling all the services they're engaged with. For example, POs might have referred them to more than one CP. So the CP can work with the individual to find a solution. Or the CP will share with the PO if the individual isn't showing up for treatment, so that the PO can reach out to the individual to problem solve the barriers they're facing. For example, getting a ride to treatment. In these circumstances, sharing information is part of the roles of line staff, POs, and CPs. This should occur on a timely basis. For example, a CP should not wait 2 weeks to notify a PO that an individual has not attended treatment sessions. Another example may be that an administrator from community supervision and the provider are sharing aggregate-level statistics to fill in the cascade to help identify where bigger picture missed opportunities may be happening. Continuing to work on sharing information, your agency should create agreed-upon expectations of what is done with the information shared. Remember, if there aren't outlined expectations for how POs or CPs should act on the information shared with them, then the responses to information sharing can be non-existent or inconsistent. Neither are outcomes we want. These are some of the questions you may ask as you set these expectations. How should POs respond to the information shared? How should CPs respond to the information shared? Are these responses done in a supportive manner or a formal response? How quickly should the information be exchanged? For example, if a CP shares with the PO that the individual is regularly showing up on time for treatment, then the PO should take the opportunity to praise the individual for their commitment. Alternatively, if an individual is having transportation barriers and not showing up for treatment, the PO would work with the individual to identify solutions and report back to the CP on efforts to address this barrier. This would be a great opportunity for the PO and CP to work together to coordinate resources they may have to help the individual with the transportation barrier. As you can see, there are several ways that the communication between POs and CPs can be formalized. When working through these processes, we recommend that you keep a shared document between the agencies that outlines the agreed-upon communication guidelines. While formal, this should be flexible to allow staff to meet the individual's needs. We know that organizational practices and standards can take a while to shift or get into place. While you're working on these, you can think of these informal communication approaches as piloting, i.e., test driving how the entire organization could improve. Ways you can help avoid these missed opportunities with the individuals you work with right now. Coordinating the handoff between the PO and CP is still the top priority. Here's an idea to get you started coming up with ideas to improve your handoffs. For the PO, when you have an individual you're referring for MOUD, you can allow them to use your phone to call and set up an appointment right away. Keep in mind that some providers may only see new clients on certain days and times. Make sure you have up-to-date contact information for the CPs, the name of the person to contact, and details about days or times they see new clients. Ideally, you can connect them with a provider who will be able to see them quickly to improve the likelihood of a successful connection. Also, make sure you help the individual identify exactly how they'll be able to get to that appointment before they leave your office. For the CP, When you have individuals calling directly from the probation officer, you can have them speak to someone who can help build rapport and make the individual feel more comfortable or engaged in the process when setting the appointment. Additionally, you could set up a process to schedule reminders for the appointment with the individual. Additionally, you can start to work on building relationship with your counterpart in the partnering agency. To do this, you can start reaching out to the POs or CPs on the other side of the referral and ask them what information would be helpful and how it could be best shared to make sure the individual receiving services is successful. Ask them what responses would be expected based on the information ideally shared. This may be challenging in larger jurisdictions with many CPs and POs. In these cases, start by reaching out to the top 3 people you work with most when it comes to the individuals with OUD. It's likely that the same information and sharing mechanisms will emerge from these conversations. Lastly, as you get to know the folks on the other side, start sharing the information that is already allowed. This may start simply as phone calls between individuals. Think about how to potentially make this efficient by setting up times to discuss multiple individuals you may have shared between you. Most important to this information process is to document it. This becomes the basis of what will hopefully become best practices for communication and sharing between your specific agencies. The solutions you come up with to help individuals successfully initiate and stay engaged in treatment can be a lesson learned and practice all your colleagues can do as well. Also, always keep in mind restrictions such as HIPAA as you do this. If you need to learn more about confidentiality restrictions, see the additional resources provided with this module. Remember we said to save those missed opportunities you identified in the last interactive activity. Get those back out, and let's start to think about how these can be formally and informally addressed. Thinking about those missed opportunities that you described earlier, identify one way that your organization could help formally address that missed opportunity. Next, identify one informal way that you could address it in your day-to-day activities now. We won't call this homework, but rather a bonus activity that you could do. Preferably, you'll work with some colleagues also completing these modules on this activity. On the included action planning handout, work through identifying action steps that you and/or your agency can take to turn some of your informal communication and information sharing into standard agency practice. The partnerships between POs and CPs are very important, but an essential piece of all of this is including the individual under supervision in the collaboration. Think about asking people what's working for them and what's not when it comes to getting treatment. On the slide, you'll find some example questions you may consider asking individuals. It's not unusual for individuals on community supervision to be told to do a lot of things, but rarely are they asked about how it's all working for them. Ideally, both community supervision and treatment can come together to gather this information and partner to better support the individual and not create more anxiety or uncertainty for them. It's important they feel involved and understand the partnership between the PO and CP. Lastly, remember to focus on the positives, not just the setbacks. Oftentimes, working with individuals on community supervision, you may feel like the school principal, only getting to really know those with the most problems. You may get so consumed by those who are struggling or not doing well that it's hard to see the positives. Really though, there are a lot of people doing well. Remember, whether you're on the community supervision or treatment side, to work together to reinforce those positives. This means letting the individual know you see the good stuff and communicating with your partner about the good stuff. In the following modules, you'll get to learn about more specific tools you can use in your role with individuals on community supervision who are either potentially appropriate for MOUD or already engaged in MOUD.